Hello and welcome to the Daily Racing Form webinar presented by Naira Bets about the Travers Stakes and this fantastic Travers card that Naira has lined up for us come this Saturday. We've got a number of special wagers to promote. In this webinar, we're going to be focusing on the $1 million all grade 1 pick 4 that starts in race 8. But be aware, there's also a $400,000 pick 5 beginning on race 1 and a $250,000 all grade 1 pick 6 starting on race 6. So we have assembled a fine team of handicappers to be discussing the late pick 4 races today, maybe getting into some of the other stuff as well. We're going to start with the creator of the Beyer Speed Figures, the author of Picking Winners, the best-selling handicapping book of all time. We always love it when he takes time out of his day to join us, talking, of course, about Andy Beyer. Andy, how are you today?
I am well. Good morning, guys.
We also have the DRF handicapper who focuses on the New York circuit. You also know him from various videos that he does with Dan Illman and Matt Bernier on the Daily Racing Form site, both previewing weekend action and reviewing it come the following top of the week. He's Mike Beyer. Mike, what's up?
Good morning, guys. Happy to be back with you again on the eve of the Travers card. It's a tremendous card coming up on Saturday.
It's pretty exciting the way this card has evolved over the years, that's for sure. Also, the stalwart of these webinars, he's always here, often producing as well as offering handicapping insight, talking, of course, about at DRF Formulator himself, DRF Director of Product Marketing, Mike Hogan. Mike, what's the story?
I'm just excited. This is amazing. I mean, you don't see 6 grade 1s on a single card very often, so I'm excited, and I'm excited to hear what Mike and Andy have to say about all the races that we're covering.
And actually, the first question I'm going to ask the panel relates to that issue exactly, Mike, and it has to do with the trend we've seen in racing towards these big days, almost mini Breeders' Cup days, if you will, and Naira in particular have done a good job setting up the Belmont card and the Travers card as these sort of mini midsummer and late summer Breeders' Cups. It's a topic we've talked about a lot in these webinars and also on the DRF Players podcast. It's also the subject of a new book by Steve Davidowitz, Cashing Big on Racing's Biggest Days. And I just wanted to start off today by asking, and we'll start with Mike Beyer, how do these super cards change the way that you approach your handicapping, Mike Beyer?
I don't know that they change the way I approach the way that I handicap. I will just say that in general, I don't care for them. I don't like the big, jamming a bunch of graded stakes races onto one card. I just prefer, I don't know, in some ways, I just prefer everyday racing for some reason. Obviously I can get excited when there's a bunch of good horses on one card, but I tend to find that it's very rarely in the middle. It's either a lot of, and of course Saratoga doesn't tend to really have that problem, at least on Saturday, but it's a lot of, maybe shorter fields and a stick-out favorite, or you get, some kind of race like, maybe like this year's Travers, where it's just a bunch of horses. It seems inscrutable, and I feel like in a lot of ways, if I'm going to bet real money, I just sort of feel like, well, I'm going to have to get a little lucky here if I'm going to cash, and I hate betting when I feel like I have to get lucky.
That's utterly logical. Andy Beyer, you contributed to the new Steve Davidowitz book, and for folks interested in your thoughts on racing's biggest days, they can check that out. A lot of fine contributions in there, not just from Davidowitz himself, but also from an interesting array of handicappers from around the country. But just generally speaking, what are your thoughts on these big days, and what aspects of your game, be they the handicapping side or the betting side, change when you're looking at these supercards?
Well, I think the industry has made a determination that these big days are better for business, better for overall public exposure than parceling them out, one big stakes race at a time. And if they were, let's face it, if we had the Travers on kind of an ordinary card today, this is not a great group of 3-year-olds, and we say, oh, well, it's kind of a down year. Instead, you look at this card, and it really, it really is an extraordinary kind of special day. So, I get pumped up for something like this. I mean, I don't want to slack off in my handicapping. I mean, maybe the opportunities are no better than on an you might find on an ordinary card, but you gotta get psyched up for a day of races like this and really put the work in, which I have done.
Fantastic. We'll be getting to that in a minute. Mike Hogan, I'm curious about your thoughts on the big days. Is it something that you're in favor of, and how, if at all, does it change your approach?
I like them. I see Mike's point, but I mean, I think this is the sort of thing that like Andy said, people get excited about. They look forward to. It's a day on the calendar they circle, knowing that there's just going to be some really interesting races and just some fantastic horses that they get the chance to see as fans, regardless of the betting opportunities that present themselves. And today, particularly in this pick 4, which if we didn't have a free square in Flincher, as Andy was saying before we started, it would be a really, really tough sequence. So I get excited for it, and it's also a lot of horses that I'm familiar with. So especially in Formulator, it's nice because I start seeing trip notes and other notes from horses because there are many of them that I've seen run 5, 10, 20 times.
All right, folks, if you want to ask a question of anyone on our panel, you can use this tool within the webinar. Very easy to do. We'll try to leave some time for questions at the end, and Mike Hogan will hopefully have an opportunity to interject at appropriate times as we're going through these races with some questions as well. If we don't get a chance to answer your question, or you think of something later, you can always reach out via Twitter. As I mentioned before, Mike can be found at DRF Formulator. I'm at Looms Boldly. We can try to answer you on Twitter, or if it's longer than 140-character response, possibly discuss on a future episode of the DRF Players Podcast. But let's move it along to the start of one of these sequences we were talking about before. It's the $1 million pick 4 beginning on race 8 that Naira is serving up for racing fans this weekend. The race is the King's Bishop, 3-year-olds going 7 furlongs. Andy Beyer, why don't we start with your thoughts on the King's Bishop, specifically how you might approach it, thinking of getting involved in this pick 4.
Okay. Well, both the King's Bishop today and the Travers have one handicapping kind of element in common. We know this at least from the speed figure standpoint, is not an exceptional group of 3-year-olds. I mean, the winning figures in the Triple Crown this year, 103, 101, 99, were historically low. So at this point of the season, maybe a handicapper should be looking for somebody, a new face or a late bloomer who's coming along and is really going to run the kind of figures, deliver the kind of performances as you usually expect from top 3-year-olds. But, at the same time, you're often faced with a dilemma. Do you want to go with the seasoned new faces, the seasoned old faces, that we've known, or a lightly raced horse who might not have as much seasoning? And that's a real question here in the King's Bishop, because we've got a colt, Summer Revolution, who's run twice, and in an allowance race at Saratoga 3 weeks ago, ran the best speed figure by any horse of his generation so far, a 105. And the number is the best in the field. This is clearly a brilliant, precocious horse. But after looking at him, I say, I just think that this is a leap too far, and I can't bet him, despite my reverence for that 105 figure. I mean, he had a soft trip in that race. I mean, was dueling with a horse named Juan and Bina, who's not so fast. It was a 1-for-19 career record, and so coming from a bottom level allowance, into a Grade 1 stake it's just asking too much. I don't think it's good management, on the part of this horse's connections. I mean, the horse that I am gravitating toward in this race is also a late bloomer, but a late bloomer who's got more substance, and that is number 13, Drifong, if that's the correct pronunciation. I mean, he's 3 for 4 in his career. He had some 2-year-old foundation. His figure of 103 last time is absolutely legitimate. He was vying with a real fast allowance horse named Guy Code, 21 and change, 43 and change. I think this is a good horse in a field where nobody really inspires me. I'm given a little bit of pause by Bob Baffert's record, shipping to Saratoga. I mean, over the last 5 years, he's just 2 for 18. But I just wonder, I just think that has to be an aberration. Overall, his record in shipping to Naira tracks is very good. I mean, he's a great trainer. He's got terrific horses. And, I think Drifong is going to be my horse here. I really don't like anybody else. I mean, I'm not so keen on Drifong that I would say I'm singling him because I love him so much. But I've drawn a line through everybody else. So it's for me, Drifong, not only on the basis of his merits, but also by process of elimination.
Andy, I bet you didn't expect prior to the race that you'd be picking a sprinter to win the King's Bishop sired by Gio Ponte, huh?
No, that's there are some odd pedigree things in this race.
Of course, you go back to Tail of the Cat, Gio Ponte sire, King's Bishop winner himself. So I don't know, maybe that brilliance and precocity. I don't exactly want to say skipped a generation, but you know what I mean in terms of Is that something, Andy? Is that an approach that you'll take frequently in a wager like a pick 4? I can sort of see the logic to. You don't really love a horse necessarily as a single, but maybe just use one horse in the first leg and spread out accordingly, and then you can always come back with the pick 3 in the next leg. Is that?
It's just that I don't want to. I mean, yes, maybe this race probably merits a spread, but I mean, spreading costs money, and if you're spreading on horses that you really don't believe in, I'll just go down with the ship if I lose. I mean, there's still a few more betting opportunities left to go. I mean, if I had one good alternative to Drifong, I'd use him, but I don't. And maybe Mike Beyer has more in-depth wisdom on this race, but I don't.
Speaking of Mike Beyer, what are your thoughts here? Is this a one-horse race, the King's Bishop?
Yeah, I agree with Andy's position on the race, and that I don't think it's that easy to get just that interested in anybody. I went through this race 4 or 5 times last night and did it again this morning when I got into the office today, and it's just a race where I think it's hard to really like anyone. My position on the race is this. I agree with Andy wholeheartedly on Summer Revolution. I think he's good. And I like both of his races, but he got off pretty easy last time. And I have to be against him in this race. Maybe he'll win. Maybe he's found the right spot. And maybe he's a 3-year-old who's just going to turn out to be better than these horses. But I'm happy to be against him in this race. I'm happy to be against Mohaymen in this race, even though I love turnbacks. I always fall for the turnback out of the Triple Crown Series races in the King's Bishop. I think every year that's the horse I'm looking for. This year it's not Mohaymen. I think he's relatively short priced in here, and I just don't think he's improved all that much from his early season races. And so I don't like him either. And I also agree with Andy on DeFrong. I spent a lot of time last night looking at his races and thinking, what a good spot for this horse to ship in. And he's a horse I want to use, but I just thought it was really tough. And, to me, I've sort of got it down to a couple of other horses with him. And I look at it this way. I am happy to call the number 2 horse in this race, Fish Trap Road, the horse to beat in here. Maybe the figures don't suggest that he is. To me, this horse is really improved as a 3-year-old for Brett Calhoun. He won the Churchill race on Derby Day. That was after the Derby, but he won that race easily when they cut him back out of the Lecomte. He was way the best horse in the Woody Stevens, the way that race was run, a wicked fast pace, and he chased it, and he overpowered the horse who was on the lead, and he was still there at the end, and that was a really tough loss for this horse, who I think ran the best race that day in the Woody Stevens, and he came right back and he crushed the field in the Dwyer, and 7 furlongs is good for him, and he has speed, and I think he can get the right kind of trip in this race, and I just feel like he's the horse to beat in a lot of ways. So I'm using him, and I just after a lot of thinking about it and a lot of consideration, I have sort of talked myself into also using, and obviously likely betting a few dollars on the 4 in this race, Caliph Saval. And I know it's a reach, and he just may not be this good of a horse, but as Andy has already pointed out, it's not like this field is littered with top 3-year-old sprinters. And I think if you pick his races apart a little bit, he's a horse who's okay. I'm happy to give him passes for the wet track races where he ran fine, but he didn't run great. His debut up here was good, sprinting on faster. His Woody Stevens I thought was deceptively good. He did not get off to a good start in that race, and he was sort of trying to chase forward as that pace got really fast, and he got into contention, but he couldn't finish it off. I thought he ran fine last time in the Dwyer. He was 3rd. He just missed 2nd to Economic Model. I think it was a pretty good performance. I think 7 furlongs might be better for him. And if he catches a fast track and some pace to run at, maybe he gets a piece of this at a big price. I'm fooling around with this horse in this race.
It seems like
let me interject. Mike, I thought that the prep races that were leading up to the King's Bishop, the Woody Stevens and the Dwyer, were really kind of a sorry group, for considering the reputation of those stakes. When you mentioned Fish Tap Road, my reaction is going to be, well, look what a bum tail of Saval is, and he was right there in the mix. I mean, I just don't see, looking at the overall records of these horses, that any of them is a particularly accomplished stakes horse.
Yeah, but they're not. But that goes for everybody in here. So I guess the question is, what position do you take? I get your position. Do you take the sort of maybe less exposed allowance horses and hope that they can make the jump? Maybe they'll do it. Maybe they found the right King Bishop to do it. But I don't know. I tend not to fall for horses like that in these races. And I do think Fish Trap Road's a little underrated. I mean, maybe these races aren't strong overall, but he's run very well within those races.
When we talk about making the big jump from allowance company into stakes, but in the case of 3-year-olds, let's remember generally speaking, the quality of competition among 3-year-olds is certainly a notch lower than you will find against older horses, and all of these horses who have made whatever reputations they have, running strictly against a very weak generation of 3-year-olds. I would venture to say that hard-knocking, like 4-year-old non-winners of 2 other than allowance horses at Santa Anita are probably better than these stakes horses. So I don't view Drifong as really taking this great leap up the class ladder.
He certainly seems to fit. We've seen this happen with 3-year-olds this time of year. Things can change. Some of the ones who have shown impressive form up to this point level off. Others continue to develop. It's a fascinating handicapping conundrum, really, the King's Bishop, and it'll be fun to see how it plays out as the start of this guaranteed pick 4 on the Travers card. Let's move it along to the 9th race, the Forgo, another Grade 1, also at 7 furlongs. Let me start off just by asking you, Andy, as a figure maker, do you like to see that, to have graded races at the same distance within such a short amount of time? Do you feel like that helps with the accuracy of the figures at all, or is it really all the same to you which other races are on the card?
Well, it's always nice to have some direct comparisons. They don't have to be consecutive races, but like to have two top-level 7 furlong races on the card. It just makes you're just always a little more comfortable making your numbers. I mean, sometimes if a race comes up unusually fast or unusually slow, and it's the only race run at at a particular distance, you say, gee, well, was there some aberration at 7 furlongs or whatever? So it gives a little extra level of confidence to the numbers.
Let's get into the specifics here, Mike Beyer. We'll start with you. What is your approach to the Forgo from a wagering standpoint, especially when it comes to this guaranteed pick 4 that NYRA's offering on Saturday?
I think my approach to it is just that the two horses on the outside are just the 2 best horses in the race. I don't know what to say about AP Indian. He's just gotten really good, and I think he's always cut out to be a good horse. He obviously had his issues. There are a couple of really long layoffs in his PPs, but overall, when he races, I mean, all he does is run. He's 8 for 10 sprinting, and it seems like the last couple of races are the best he's ever run, and I don't know, he can get the right trip in this race. I just feel like he's coming right back into a Forgo field that, he's probably going to be able to beat with his typical race as he runs it right now anyway, and I like him. I even feel like 7 furlongs might be a better distance for him than 6, and I like him. I think Martin has maybe a chance to reverse that Belmont Sprint Championship decision with him, but boy, I mean, felt like going back and looking at that race that Martin really had the best of it that day. He was on the outside. That was a day where I feel like he did not want to be down towards the rail, and that's exactly where AP Indian was for a lot of the race, and AP Indian was still able to outfinish Martin. I still think Martin's good, and I think he can win this race, but I don't know. I preferred AP Indian to him. I'm using those 2 horses, and I'm going to use Catalina Red down on the rail. I don't know where this horse is right now. I hated the True North as a race overall, and I hated his performance in it, even though he was chasing a little bit in there. That might not be what he wants to do. But I thought he ran fine last time. He was sort of a deceptively good third, I thought, in the Vanderbilt. And, maybe he can get, back to one of his good races and get a piece of this. He's 3 for 3 at 7 furlongs too. I don't trust this trainer in New York. He puts up incredible numbers outside of New York, and he's a mediocrity in New York. But I'm going to use Catalina Red in this race regardless.
Mike, do you see yourself using those horses equally? Would you press AP Indian a little bit, or in terms of if you were to assign A's and B's, how would you look?
Yeah, I maybe on most tickets use the 11 and 12 equally, but I'll press AP Indian on some tickets in that race. And Catalina Red is just a backup to me, just because I think he does have a chance. I don't really trust him, and it's not like he got some kind of great post down on the rail, but I thought he might be in a little bit of a price in this race to include somewhere in the pick.
Andy, your thoughts on the Forgo?
I respect AP Indian. I just don't love him. This is not the kind of horse that I really, I want to bet or at least hang a pick 4 play around. I mean, he got an outstanding figure last time, but he did it with with kind of an ideal setup in that race. I mean, it was obviously a super fast track, and going 22 at a fraction, 44.6. That's a slow pace that day. That was a day when I thought the rail was very strong, and he was either in the two-path or on the rail all the way. I think AP Indian, his ability is more reflected by those figures of 102, 101, which are okay, but would not make me fall in love with them. The two horses that that I'm going to use, and on my main ticket, and and try to get in there at reasonable prices are the one that Mike mentioned, Catalina Red, as well as the 8 Stallwalking Dude. I agree with what he said about Jorge Navarro. I mean, he's been poison in New York, and we all raise our eyebrows whenever we see his name in the form. But I think he has run at Saratoga, so you can, forgetting everything else, you judge him off that last race, and it was pretty good. Again, on a day when the rail was good, he angled out into the 3-path. He was outside of AP&D. I feel that he was in races with both his last 2 starts in New York with relatively slow paces, for the level. This is a horse who has got a really good kick after, and he loves 7 furlongs. You just underline those 3 7-furlong races. He's always coming like from 4th or 5th and drawing away at the end. I thought he was compromised a little bit by the pace in both of his New York races. I mean, he's pretty good. And as for Stallwalking Dude, he really had a difficult time that last time. I mean, he was from post 1. He was off kind of awkwardly, and found himself in the back of the pack. And this is a really fast horse. In fact, his previous start, he got involved in a suicidally fast pace, which probably compromised him then. But he's not supposed to be sitting 8th in the field. So, for him to win with a figure of 102, under those circumstances was I thought a commendable effort. And his form before that had been a little bit ratty. But if you go back to 2015, when this horse got good, he stayed good for a lot of races, reeling off triple-digit figures. I think he's good now. So for me, it's going to be the 1 and 8 on the main ticket. I'm going to put 11, 12, and maybe a little 9 on my backup ticket, but I'm going to try to get in a price here.
Seems a logical approach. I know you're not a big horse-for-course guy, but Stallwalking Dudes, 2 big efforts over the Saratoga surface, they certainly don't hurt the appeal, right? Or do you not look at that even at all, Andy?
No, it's not something I usually factor in. It's certainly okay. It's a little plus, but I think a lot of those horse-for-courses stats are just kind of circumstantial. That the horses won when the situation was right for them.
Mike Hogan, we're halfway through the guaranteed pick 4. Do we have any questions focusing on the first 2 legs for the guys before we move it along to talk about the Grade 1 Sword Dancer?
Yeah, we do. We don't really have any on the Forgo, but we do have a couple going back to the King's Bishop. One is from Chuck Gunther, who wants to know, for you, Andy, given your opinion on the level of competition that it's generally weak, is your approach, I'll pick one horse and go to, like you said, go down with the ship, or are those the kinds of races that you like to actually reach for a price?
I don't have a dogma here. I mean, just as I say, in this case, the way the race came up, I thought I could make to myself reasonable arguments for Drifong, and I just didn't like any. I viewed everybody else negatively. That's that you usually you may not see a race like that that say, well, there are two or three that I want to throw in as backups. I don't want to have a formula for playing these races. You take each race, form your own judgment, and do what your handicapping tells you should do.
The 10th race is an interesting hinge here, the Sword Dancer, because not only is it the third leg of the Pick 4 that we're talking about in the main on this webinar, but it's also the start of a late Pick 4 linking the last 4 races on this super stuffed Travers Day card. Andy, let's keep it with you. What are we doing here? Is there anything even to talk about in the Sword Dancer this year?
Oh, no, there is not. We can save our breath a little. I mean, Flincher really is a tremendous horse. I mean, he couldn't have had more adverse pace circumstances than he did last time in that ridiculous Bowling Green going 6 furlongs in 119, and he still mowed everybody down. He wins, or all right thinking people are going to lose. I mean, this is no race to get clever in.
Mike Beyer, can you make a case for even putting 5% of a Pick 4 investment on someone other than Flincher in this spot?
No. I mean, I know that things happen in races, and if something goes wrong, you can somehow beat them. Obviously, the payoffs are going to be huge, but I'm not. I mean, he's a world-class horse running against, maybe grade 2 or 3 kinds of horses. He proved last time that no matter what happens, really, he's just not going to lose to these horses.
All right. Without further ado, I think we should move it along on this. Did you have something, Mike Hogan?
I was just going to note that Chad Brown and Juddmonte, Andy had mentioned the pace scenario in the previous race. I think they've taken measures to make sure that doesn't happen again in here. Inordinate entered for Chad Brown and Juddmonte with Aaron Greider aboard. I would imagine his role in here is to specifically assure that Flincher doesn't see the kind of pace scenario he got last time.
And it might not even matter if he did. But with that, let's move it along
Right.
to the Travers. Obviously we're dealing with 10 furlongs and 3-year-olds here. It's the 147th running of this race, an annual highlight of the meet at Saratoga, and the reason this day is built up the way that it has. Mike Beyer, we'll start with you. What's our approach? Specifically from a Pick 4 point of view, but also in general when it comes to betting this year's Travers?
I don't know, man. This race is tough. This is what I did in the race, and I really want to let Andy talk about his thoughts on Exaggerator, because I'm very interested to hear what he has to say. To me, I just looking at the wet track races, and obviously he's got 3 really big ones. And then I guess the Belmont is just one of those races that you either have to just say it's a 1.5 miles and he didn't fire for whatever reason and it had nothing to do with the track conditions, or is he just a big wet track move-up kind of horse? I still don't think that I know the answer to that. That's why I want to hear what Andy has to say about it. I
can get him to answer that right away if you want, Mike, before we go.
I just want to hear, I think the race, to me, the race starts with Exaggerator because obviously he's got the credentials. And, I mean, if he can run, one of his really good races, he's just supposed to be really, really tough in this race. But I just feel like he's really hard to get fully behind as the favorite in a race like this. Doesn't mean that I'm not going to use him somewhere in the Pick 4, but I just feel like he's probably the kind of horse you want to try and beat in the Travers. And I don't know if Andy agrees with that or not.
What do you think, Andy?
Well, you're absolutely right about the being a horse who moves up in the slop, but by the same token, there is that line in the Kentucky Derby there where he got beat a length on on a fast track, so and he earned a figure, comparable to his sloppy track wins. So I'm not sure that I would say he moves up all that much in the slop. Just that he can handle it, and maybe other horses don't. I just feel that for a horse whose figures are this modest, I feel almost obligated to try to take a shot against him. I mean, I respect this horse and his consistency and his late kick, but man, those are still 101s. And he's not that great. In another year, he would be just another 3-year-old. I want to try to beat him, and that's my approach going in.
All right, well, let's go back to you, Mike Beyer, for who we're going to do the beating with. I don't know if you want to approach it from sort of an ABC perspective or just share your thoughts generally on the race, but the floor is yours. What are we doing in this Travers?
I feel like, here's how I decide. I mean, obviously, there's just too many different ways to go in here. I think a lot of different horses can win, but you can't use them all. My first decision that I made in the race was that, and I realize this may come back to haunt me in the end, but I'm going to be against the horses coming out of the Curlin. I have a lot of respect for both Connect and Gift Box. I think they're both pretty good, and I think they both have a real chance to win the Travers. I just, you got to make decisions somewhere. I'm going to be against those two horses. I thought they both ran fine in that race. Another little move forward, and either one could win, and they're both lightly raced enough to project some improvement. I'm just going to be against them. I also, I don't love the Jim Dandy as a race, and I know that looking at it as a prep race, at least for some of them, is maybe the right way to go. I never liked the horses in that race, early on along the Triple Crown Trail anyway. And then they come back in the Jim Dandy, and they get wired by Loban. I know it was a track where you wanted to sort of be inside. Loban got loose on the lead, and he was always sort of towards the rail. Took advantage, and maybe it worked against some of the other horses in there. But I don't know, man. I just don't like those horses that much. If I had to use one of the horses out of the Jim Dandy, I'll use Destin, just because he was sort of always chasing on the outside. But I don't love Destin. And so I'm started to whittle down the contenders that way. I feel like I would have really liked Gunrunner and probably picked him on top in this race if he didn't have post 14, just on the theory that, he ran fine in the Derby. I think he acquitted himself really well in that race and showed that, for whatever the top of this division looks like right now, he's probably pretty close to it. I can give him the wet track excuse in the house. We didn't have to love that track. But he's got such a terrible post in this race that it's hard for me to really love him. But I'm still going to use him and hope that Giroux can work something out for him from the outside. And then I just wound up with the two Baffert horses down on the rail, who I think are really tough calls. I will use both of them. I think American Freedom is good. Obviously, there's a lot of hype surrounding this horse. He ran really well in the Haskell. I don't know that he ran great, but I thought he ran really well. And, I just sort of look at him and think, he's going to be a relatively short price in this race. He can win. I'm going to use him. I really like Baffert's other horse. I think the Travers is probably a little too tough for him. I think down the line, Arrowgate's going to be really good. And this is just one of those things where I just go off of a lot of my notes that I keep on horses. Obviously, he fits on figures anyway. But he's defeated 10 rivals in his 3 wins. He's facing 13 on Saturday. So that's a pretty big question for him to answer. But he fits on figures. He has a pretty nice, handy running style that I like about him, and he's got a good post. And I love the way that he finishes in his races. It makes me feel like he'll be okay as the distance stretch out. Is the Travers the right race for him? I don't know. It probably isn't. But I really like what I've seen from him, and I think he will be a price in this race. So he's a horse I'm definitely using here.
What do you make, Mike Beyer, of the blinkers coming off of American Freedom? Do you think we might see a change in running style, or do you expect him to be a big part of the pace situation?
Yeah, I don't really know what choice they have from post 2. I mean, they don't have to obviously be on an all-out send in here, but he's got an inside post. You can't just sort of lollygag out of the gate and let the whole field drop over on you and lose position. I feel like maybe they won't be sending for the lead in here, but Beyer has got to come out of the gate running and try and get his position sort of up close to the pace here into the first turn.
Mike Hogan was just showing the formulator stat was a little bit inconclusive, I think, when it comes to Baffert with this move in graded stakes with the lack of sample. But it is interesting, one of the many tools you can use formulator for. Andy Beyer, what are your thoughts on the Travers here? How are we going to get this pick 4 home?
Well, I too looked hard at the two Baffert horses, and I feel a little bit about Arrogate the way I do that I did about Summer Revolution and the King's Bishop. I mean, that this is a very talented horse. I mean, when he ran that 103, it was the best figure, equaled the best figure of his generation. But you look at what this horse has done. He won a maiden race on the lead in a slow pace. He won an allowance race in a field of 5 on the lead in the slow pace, and then he won in a field of 3. Now to go into a field of 14, seasoned horses, this again strikes me as just a bit of an overreach at this stage of his career. Contrarily, American Freedom also was a relatively lightly raced horse and a late bloomer, but he has really, I think, really proved his mettle. I mean, his only bad race was that one in the Pat Day Mile at Churchill, and he really had, he just got squeezed out of the race at the start. He's run well every time. And last time, I mean, if as a trip handicapper, you look at the circumstances of his last race, and you say, who was the best horse in the Haskell? The answer is not Exaggerator. The answer is American Freedom. I mean, he's parked 4 wide going into the first turns, and then he's going head and head with the Kentucky Derby winner in 22.78 to the first quarter, and fast fractions all the way around. Well, Exaggerator is just biding his time at the back of the pack and rallies to beat him. I mean, the pace circumstances, the trip circumstances of that race surely made a length and a half difference. I think American Freedom is pretty good and would be, is my pick to win this race. Now, I don't have that. Let's say this would not be a standalone number. If I were alive in a pick 4, I mean, I would have Exaggerator on a secondary ticket. I mean, I'm not. I'm not a masochist. You don't want to get beat by a horse like this. I agree with Mike's view of the Curlin. I don't think it was that good, and even I think our number might have been a little high on that. It was kind of ambiguous. But Gift Box, does look, he's a horse who's got a good late kick, and he really couldn't deliver it in that slow pace race. I think he's going to run well. Now there's we've talked about the sort of negative Baffert statistics, but like about the most negative stat that I can come up with in this whole sequence is Chad Brown and with Colts and Grade 1 stakes on the dirt, 0 for 32 over 5 years. I mean, as brilliant a trainer as Chad is on the turf, he hasn't. He hasn't had quite the same magic at the top level in dirt races. I mean, I'm sure he's due to break through, and I'm going to use a little gift box in my backups.
Mike Hogan, a question for you. I got one for you, Mike, before we get to that, if you don't mind. I'm just curious, you spend a lot of time, obviously, helping people out and looking at trainer stats. Those two stats we've been talking about, the recent Baffert performance in Saratoga and the Chad Brown stat that Andy just dropped with the 0 for 32 graded stakes dirt males. Do those...
That's grade 1 stakes.
Graded 1, sorry.
Right.
Do either of those give you pause as somebody who looks at trainer stats a lot?
The way I approach trainer stats is not as a foremost handicapping tool. For me, I handicap more on figures and pace and class and a lot of more of the essentials. I will upgrade or downgrade based on certain stats that are either really positive or really negative, but a lot of times the way I use stats like this is more to inform my betting. If there's a horse that I think is the most likely winner or a horse that I want to bet, but there's just a really negative trainer stat, like Andy mentioned, Chad in dirt grade 1s, similarly Todd Pletcher in turf grade 1s. What I might do is instead of singling a horse, I might be a little bit less, I guess I might hedge a little bit more, I'll say. Or I might upgrade ones, that I think might be a second tier contender. I might add them to an A if there's a really strong stat from a trainer standpoint. But that said, I don't use the fact that, look, I'm showing it on the screen right now. Chad Brown has never won in his career. He's had 1,000 races. He won his 1,000th race yesterday. None of them came in dirt graded stakes at Saratoga. He's 0 for 19 lifetime, 0 for 17 in the last 5 years, only had 3 hit the board. He'll win one of these eventually, so I don't immediately toss a horse just because of that stat, but it does give me a little bit of pause just knowing some of the horses he's had that have taken some money and not run as well as they had expected to.
Mike Hogan, it sounded like another question came in for the guys about this race.
Well, there was another question. One of the questions we had early on was from a pace standpoint, assuming that there might be a little bit more speed than what Lauband saw last out in the Jim Dandy, who would you guys see as the 4 best closers, or perhaps even the best closer in the Travers?
Well, the best closer is probably Creator, but I don't, this seems like this Travers seems like a neutral race in terms of pace. I mean, you've got horses with speed like Arrogate and American Freedom and Lauband, but it doesn't look like it sets up to be one of those any kind of a suicidal race that is going to set it up for a horse coming from a mile behind. I think looking for the best horse may be the clever move in here.
It so often is. Mike Beyer, any thoughts on the pace to add to what Andy said, or are you pretty much in agreement and we'll move on?
No, I do agree with them. I don't think there's going to be some kind of crazy fast pace in this race. I think it's kind of one of those that I just look at and think it'd probably be fair, for horses. If you're going to be up close, that's probably going to be okay. If you're going to try and close, it's not like they're going to be walking in front of you. If you're looking for the best closers, right? Obviously, I think Exaggerator is an obvious strong closer in a race, and so is Creator. And I just don't know that this race is going to be some kind of meltdown, though.
All right, let's go ahead and talk about the nightcap, which is from just a pure narrative point of view, one of the most, it's not actually the nightcap, it's the 12th, but one of the most exciting races on the card, one of the easiest ones to write a headline about, which sees the almost miraculous return to the races of the great Lady Eli, who turned so many heads last year. For you, Mike Beyer, is this a case of a race you're going to watch, or can you figure out an angle in to beat Lady Eli, or is she somebody you might lean on in multi-race bets?
It sort of, I guess, depends. It does sort of feel like they will almost go overboard on her just because of the story, and it's a good one, and she's a really good horse. And I guess you sort of get the feeling like, why are they running her? They wouldn't run her, right? If everything wasn't okay with her.
It would seem nuts, yeah.
Yeah, you would seem not. So I just think you can sort of assume that she can still go, and if she can still go, she's probably going to win. But it's a very long layoff. There has been an issue. She is going to be a really short price. And if they just go way overboard and I can get, 7-2, 4-1 on Sentiero Italia, then I'll bet her.
Andy Beyer, what's your thought on Lady Eli? Race to watch or race to bet?
Well, I'd love to. I love this filly. I mean, she was just great in so many of her races. I couldn't bet on her, tomorrow or Saturday. I'll root for her, but I mean, she's coming back from a near fatal illness. After a year, and if they ran this race, and let's say she got beat a length by Miss Temple City, I bet everybody or people around her, even Chad, would say, well, under the circumstances, this was a tremendous effort to even run a good race. Against like a proved grade 1 4-year-old. I mean, Miss Temple City is no slouch. She ran that tremendous race against males in the Maker's Mark. I mean, she loses a photo to DeCita, who's just about as good as they come among the fillies, and she had some traffic in that race. I mean, this is a top class filly, and so to take a real low odds on price against her, on a horse who is had the travails of Lady Eli, I think you're taking all the worst of it. I hope Lady Eli runs well, but to expect her to win against this field, it's not it's no foregone conclusion by any means.
Hardly a field of tomato cans, especially with those two that you guys seem to be gravitating toward.
No, this is not a flincher situation where you just look at the field in 15 seconds and say, this race is over. The Ballston Spa is no foregone conclusion.
That comment, Andy, segues nicely into a question we received earlier today, actually, about the criteria for quickly throwing out a horse and what that criteria might be. Obviously, I'm sure you frame it in terms of speed figures, but are there other factors that go into the ability to quickly just X out a horse? And even when it comes to speed figures, is there any sort of threshold? In other words, if a horse is run within 5 points of what you expect for today's race, is that enough to say, okay, maybe they could be a peripheral contender?
I don't have a hard and fast rule, but if you see that a horse has never in his career kind of run in the ballpark, that where the race is likely to be run, unless you really see, see some wonderful subtleties why the horse should improve. I just put an X over. I mean, like, I'm just looking at on my desk here, like My Man Sam, not a bad horse, in the Travers, but 98, 81, 88, in a race that's going to go in 100, 102. There's just no reason to believe that he could step up to that level. But I don't think you should approach situations like this with a really rigid set of standards. Like I'll throw him out if he's not within 7 points. That's a little too dogmatic.
Mike Beyer, how about you, your criteria for eliminating horses quickly?
Yeah, I don't think I have I'm like Andy. I don't think there's any hard and fast rule for something like that. You have to look at every race individually. I just, my thing is, there will be, I guess, some that are just obvious horses that you aren't going to use anywhere. You just have to make sure you're on some kind of solid ground if you're just going to start tossing horses. Some of them will just jump out at you that you just know that aren't good enough for the race they're running in, but you just still want to be a little careful with it.
We also had a question come in about the importance of workouts. The question actually specifically was about who's working well. We don't have access to the DRF workout report yet. That will be available on drf.com, I think starting either late tonight or tomorrow. But I was just curious in terms of both of your guys handicapping, how much, if at all, you factor in reports of how horses are working. Mike Beer, we'll start with you.
Very rarely do I look at it. I do appreciate the work those guys do. It's just, generally speaking, their stuff comes in too late for me to look at anyway.
Right.
And, maybe I'll take a peek at it for the, 2-year-old first-time starter stuff. But overall, I don't spend a lot of time looking at workouts, in general in my handicapping, and, certainly, don't, factor it in all that much into my, wagering strategies.
Andy Beyer, how about you?
I look at the Mike Vesey workout report every day, every race of the Saratoga meeting. I think it is an indispensable tool, particularly with the kinds of races you have at Saratoga, with so many first-time starters or laid off or lightly raced horses. And it's, I just think a huge edge. I mean, this is, what happens in the morning is such a big, such a big part of the game that, this is what consumes trainers, through most of their lives, and I mean, every day the horses are doing something in between the a month or 2-month gap when the horses run, and to know what's going on in a horse's form cycle, between starts, is very important. And obviously with 2-year-olds, it's and first-time starters, it's everything. So and I'm not shilling for the DRF product. I'm just saying as a statement of fact, with this information available, I would never overlook it.
With an endorsement like that, I'll ask Mike Hogan if he knows the specifics. Do we know when those clocker reports will be available specifically for the Saratoga card for people to buy on drf.com?
They're usually available the day prior, so I would expect the one for the Travers card to be available Friday early afternoon.
Excellent. We've got just a minute or two left. Mike Hogan, is there another question you want to get to before we wrap things up?
There are a few that we're not, unfortunately, going to be able to get to, but one question I wanted to ask comes from Brad Taylor. It sounds like Brad either was at the CIRO seminar last week or watched it online and wanted to ask Andy about his opinion of jockeys and how much they factor into his handicapping. In that seminar, Mike Beer said he doesn't look at jockeys at all. Andy, are you a little bit more bullish with jockeys, or do you just ignore them as well?
No, I scarcely pay attention. I think that I think it's kind of dangerous for horse players to start developing hatreds for particular jockeys, and when you follow jockeys, it's easy to hate some of them. So I really I barely notice who's riding my horse. I mean, occasionally I might look and say, gee, I like this horse. I've started him, and who is this rider? I've never heard of him. But even that won't stop me. Maybe it's a mistake, but I pay almost no attention to them.
All right, folks, that's all the time we have. Thanks for submitting questions. Mike Hogan and I will try to get back to some of you on Twitter or perhaps address them in the next edition of the DRF Players Podcast, which will be recording early tomorrow. Just want to thank everybody for tuning in to the Travers Day webinar presented by Naira Bets. Also want to mention that, folks, if you haven't been already, definitely take the opportunity to check out Saratoga Live every race day at 4 p.m. on Fox Sports 2 nationally. Also for local listings, you can go to Naira.com. Team on there, including our friend Andy Serling, do a fantastic job covering typically it's the last 4 races from Saratoga. Want to remind you again about all these wagering opportunities we have via Naira on Saturday. There's a $400,000 pick 5 beginning on race 1, $250,000 pick 6 beginning on race 6, and the $1 million pick 4 we've been talking about this webinar starting with race 8. If you want to go back and check out any of the opportunities, any of the stuff that you missed in this webinar, or just listen again, you can find that drf.com/YouTube. We're hoping you have a great day out there on Saturday. Thanks so much to the panelists and for you all for watching. This has been a webinar produced by drf.com.